Hello, welcome everybody to New Hampshire Peace Action's Peace and Justice Conversation series online. I'm Will Hopkins. I'm the director of New Hampshire Peace Action. If you're new to our organization, we educate, mobilize, and organize to build a more peaceful and just future for all. We envisage a future where international relations are based on cooperation instead of competition and conflict, and where mutual benefit and shared security lead to a more peaceful and just global community. The corona pandemic spurred us to start this biweekly conversation series as a way to continue our public education work way back in the spring of 2020. And we found it so effective that we've decided to continue on indefinitely. This biweekly conversation series is intended to help us engage and sort out how to make the changes we've been yearning for. In that spirit of understanding and respect, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we're doing our work here in New Hampshire on the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. And we want to honor with gratitude the land and waterways that they've been stewarding throughout the generations. So tonight, I'm excited to bring you two of my friends from Veterans for Peace. Helen, Jaccard, and Gerry Condon work on the Golden Rule, which is a boat that has a wonderful history, a sailboat, and is currently sailing around doing the Great Loop, or is it the Grand? It's the Great Loop. Sailing around, talking to people about the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the Back from the Brink proposal, and the danger that nuclear weapons pose today. So Helen and Gerry, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you so you can talk to us a little bit about the project you're working on.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to use a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to share my screen. There we go. All right. So this is the Golden Rule. It's a national project of Veterans for Peace, and you can see she has bright red sails with the Veterans for Peace logo and the peace sign on her. This is one of the actions we did in Hawaii. There we go. Okay, so Veterans for Peace has over 100 chapters, 10 of which are international chapters in various countries, and we have over 3,000 members. And the Golden Rule Project is fulfilling some of the mission of Veterans for Peace, including abolition of nuclear weapons. And this is a tool that we're using to stop the possibility of nuclear war. In 1958, by 1958, the United States had used 67 nuclear weapons in the Marshall Islands, testing and developing nuclear weapons there. And this is the way the Golden Rule looked back then. And before they sailed towards the Marshall Islands, here's a picture of probably the Castle Bravo test. But still persistent through today in the Marshall Islands, you have birth defects, a high rate of cancer, radiation in the atmosphere still. And the people of the Marshall Islands, they can't grow food or catch fish because it is contaminated with radiation, uranium and plutonium primarily, but other things. And so the United States imports poor quality food for them to eat. Mostly Spam and rice is what they eat for their diet. During the period of the atmospheric nuclear weapons testing, people tried to stop this testing because of the radiation blowing around in the atmosphere. They called Congress and the president, they wrote letters, they did TV and radio interviews, and they did protests and demonstrations in the streets. But these tactics weren't successful, so they decided to get a boat. They bought the Golden Rule. This was a group of 4 Quaker peace activists, bought the Golden Rule and intended to sail her right into the nuclear weapons testing zone in the Marshall Islands. They made it halfway across. You can see they started out of Los Angeles and they made it to Honolulu and in Hawaii, and then they were headed over to the Marshall Islands. You can see the map of where they were going. They got to Honolulu, they resupplied, and they headed out towards the Marshall Islands, and a Coast Guard cutter brought them back. They ended up spending 60 days in jail. They made a second attempt and got brought back again. The arrest of the crew of the Golden Rule, which was a widely publicized action, brought about a huge amount of protest, not just in the United States, but around the world, to stop the bomb testing and to let the crew of the Golden Rule go free. Golden Rule was sold and disappeared from public view until she sank in a gale in far northern California in 2010. 2 chapters of Veterans for Peace decided to rebuild her. And in 2012, she became a national project of Veterans for Peace. So there she is in her sorriest state ever. So here's, reconstructing her. They had to patch the holes. And then in June of 2015, we relaunched her into the waters of Northern California. So for part of the first 5 years, we were sailing up and down the California coast. And in 2016, we were able to visit the Pacific Northwest. When we finished with that, we decided, so Trump and Kim were threatening each other with nuclear annihilation. And so we decided that in order to try to stop a war between North Korea and the United States, we would head back into the Pacific. And we, once again, the Golden Rule made it to the Hawaiian Islands, where we spent 2 years sailing all around the Hawaiian Islands. And then we were ready to take off from Honolulu towards the Marshall Islands. And we were stopped by COVID. It was March of 2020. We were ready to go, and we couldn't go anywhere. So we ended our program temporarily and then brought her back to California. And when we got back, we decided to fulfill the dream of the people that had rebuilt the Golden Rule. They spent 5 years on this. 5 years showing up at that boatyard every single day, making progress until finally she was relaunched. So we decided to honor their dream, and we put the Golden Rule on a truck and we took her to Minneapolis. And this is a graphic of the Great Loop, our version of it. Normally you would start somewhere around the rest of the circle. You don't start in Minneapolis, but we have a very strong chapter of Veterans for Peace in Minneapolis, and they insisted that if we were going to put her on a truck, we might as well take her there. So we did. And we were intending to go down the entire Mississippi River, the whole yellow line on the map. And when we got, into the Mississippi, it became fairly clear that the drought last year was going to stop us from doing the lower Mississippi River. So we diverted instead into the Ohio, Tennessee, and Tombigbee River system. And instead of coming out in Baton Rouge and New Orleans, we came out in Mobile, Alabama. We went down the tip of Florida, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, but we're headed up. We've been to Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York. Now we're in Connecticut, headed up to Massachusetts soon. We'll go to Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. And then when we get to Maine, we're going to be up as far as Bath, Maine, where Bath Iron Works, it makes some, ships of mass destruction. And then we'll come back south to New York, get ourselves into the Great Lakes, and sail all around the Great Lakes before heading out of Chicago, where we're not too sure what we're going to do after that. But that's our plan. That'll take us up until the end of September this year. So this is a year-long trip, 11,000 miles, and we're going to be stopping in well over 100 cities and towns to give talks like this. Here's some of the things that we've been doing along the way. We have programs for children. We take people sailing, including children. We do Fleet Week events where we sail the Golden Rule in front of big warships that invade our cities. We protested at the Bangor Nuclear Submarine Base up near Seattle. had a Fleet Week event in San Francisco. We supported an indigenous canoe voyage. There's a great film on our website, Making Waves, Rebirth of the Golden Rule. And it even won an award in the Guam International Film Festival for the best short documentary. You can see that this was done, this was one of the images of the Golden Rule in front of this warship, and it looks like they're saluting the Golden Rule. Pretty cool. When we were in Hawaii, we went out with a group of students who use a traditional Hawaiian sailing canoe. And we honor the people that came from the Marshall Islands to the United States, either just temporarily for medical care or permanently. Because of what the United States did to their islands, they can come here, they can live here, they can work here. That doesn't automatically make them citizens. And right now they do have the availability of Medicaid so they can get some health care. And this was a commemoration on Magic Island in front of Diamond Head in Honolulu to commemorate the largest nuclear weapon the United States ever used on March 1st, 1954. It was the bomb that did the most damage to the Marshall Islands and other surrounding areas. So we have a program we're associated with Back from the Brink, which is a global effort to prevent nuclear war. The biggest thing that Back from the Brink is calling on is to get every nation to ratify the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And Gerry, when he goes over the Veterans for Peace Nuclear Posture Review, we'll talk about the recommendations that we came up with that are also part of Back from the Brink. There's the map of where we've been, a couple of pictures from our voyage to Cuba. We recently were able to visit with 13 approximately countries. From their embassies, they came to the Mexican embassy in New York, and we got to meet with them. And then we got to meet with the Marshall Islands embassy, when you can see that group picture there. And we participated in a Fleet Week action in New York Harbor. We were just right on Manhattan Island. And while we were in Georgia, we protested against the nuclear armed submarines there. You can see that we're about to take off and go visit the the Trident nuclear submarine base in Georgia, Kings Bay. So this is the Kings Bay Naval Base. And one of the things we really love to do is have a picnic in the park, a peace picnic in the park. So there's a picture of one of those. We're being given welcome proclamations from all of the mayors wherever we go. And now we come to the nuclear posture review. One of the things that we did in April was we ran all over the halls of Congress and we gave a copy of this nuclear posture review to every representative and senator in the United States. So I'm going to turn the program over to Gerry for now. Gerry Condon, former president of Veterans for Peace and currently the president of the Golden Rule Steering Committee. And once again, he's on the National Board of Directors of Veterans for Peace. Gerry Condon.
I'll take this.
Okay. Why don't I move? You can sit.
You gotta quickly put it off with the screen share.
Okay, sure.
All right, hi everybody. So yes, Veterans for Peace has, aside from the Golden Rule, part of our mission statement is to reduce and eventually eliminate all nuclear weapons. And but until a few years ago, that wasn't really a major part of our program, but it is now. And aside from the Golden Rule, which is an incredible manifestation of that mission to reduce and eliminate all nuclear weapons. We also have a very active nuclear abolition working group, and one of the things we were doing a year or so back. We were waiting eagerly for President Biden to present his nuclear posture review. Ever since the Clinton administration, it's become kind of an informal tradition for the incoming administration to issue a nuclear posture review, basically telling the people of the United States and the world what its position is, under what circumstances it would use nuclear weapons. And President Biden, when he was running for president, indicated that he might declare a no first use policy. So there was, in fact, he said that he would, I believe, or he said he was seriously considering it, I guess. Unfortunately, he kept on considering it too much and decided not to do it, apparently. Well, we were waiting a long time for that nuclear posture review, which is actually written by the Pentagon. And it didn't come. So finally, we decided, hey, why don't we issue our own nuclear posture review? So we got to work. We had several people among us who had a lot of experience and knowledge. And then we did a lot of research, and we came up with this document here. It's about 10 pages, VFP Nuclear Posture Review. And what it does is it basically reviews the history of U.S. nuclear deployments and the relationship that the U.S. has with the other 8 nuclear armed nations, as well as with Iran, which does not have nuclear weapons. And for example, here in the nuclear posture with Russia is quite significant, I think. Well, it mentions that the world has gone from 70,000 nuclear weapons during the height of the Cold War to the 14,000 on the planet today. 90% of those are held by the U.S. and Russia. And that's a very hopeful thing, that if you can reduce that many nuclear weapons, why not the rest? Some people ask. But the U.S. has missed numerous opportunities to cooperate with Russia over the years. And some of the recent examples in recent decades, President Reagan rejected President Gorbachev's offer to give up deployment of a Star Wars missile defense system in space as a condition for both countries to eliminate all their nuclear weapons. President Clinton refused President Putin's offer to cut our massive nuclear arsenals to 1,500 bombs each. Right now, they're about, 7,000 each or something. Is that right?
About 500.
And to call on all the other nuclear armed nations to negotiate the elimination of all nuclear weapons in exchange for the U.S. not placing missile sites in Romania near Russia's border. President George W. Bush walked out of the 1972 anti-ballistic missile treaty. Well, he didn't really walk out of it, but he unilaterally withdrew from that treaty. And then President Trump placed another missile base in Poland. Bush had Jr. put one in Romania. Then President Bush in 2008 and President Obama in 2014 blocked any discussion of Russian and Chinese proposals for a space weapons ban in the UN Committee for Disarmament in Geneva. President Obama rejected President Putin's offer to negotiate a treaty to ban cyber war. President Trump unilaterally pulled the U.S. out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. So, these are treaties that, people organize for and push for years and years. And then they get negotiated for years and years. And finally, they get ratified by the U.S. Senate. It's a long, hard struggle to get there. And these presidents can come along and just unilaterally tear them up, which is what's happened here. And what kind of message does that send to Russia that, okay, we're going to get out of the ABM treaty and we're going to get out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. Those are mostly weapons that the U.S. has in Europe and pointed at Russia. So then former President Clinton and through Biden, the U.S. has never ratified the 1992 Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty,
And now New START is falling apart.
which Russia has ratified. And now, due to the war in Iraq, in Ukraine, Russia has withdrawn, at least temporarily, from the New START treaty, and the U.S. is beginning to take measures to do the same. The only remaining treaty that puts some safeguards on the relationship between the two nuclear superpowers. So we're very dangerous territory there. So the Nuclear Posture Review of Veterans for Peace goes on to make a number of recommendations, actually 16 specific recommendations. I'm not going to read all of them now, but they're in 3 categories. One's unilateral immediate posture changes, such as announcing and implementing a no first use and no launch on warning policy, decommissioning ICBM weapons and silos, replacing the president's sole authority to launch a nuclear attack, and eliminate the THAAD and other anti-ballistic missile systems. Under negotiations for nuclear disarmament, first and foremost, sign the treaty, the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and actively initiate and pursue negotiations to reduce international tensions, promote strategic stability, and prepare the ground for major reduction in nuclear arms. And then finally, there's implementation of already existing treaties. Work with our allies to remove U.S. nuclear weapons stationed in the NATO countries, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Turkey. Bring home submarines carrying nuclear weapons, ground the nuclear bombers, and dismantle the missile sites. And there's others. And then finally, we conclude, and it's kind of a sobering conclusion here, that it's hard to imagine the U.S. taking serious steps toward nuclear disarmament without a sea change in the thinking among our political elites and real change in the U.S. posture towards the rest of the world. So it's really important, we believe, for activists' efforts to restrain U.S. militarism and intervention around the globe, cut the military budget, and to encourage mutual respect and diplomacy among nations must go hand in hand with efforts to reduce and eliminate nuclear weapons. So that's our nuclear posture review. And I'll just add that on this current trip of the Golden Rule around the so-called Great Loop, we ended up at Key West, Florida at the end of December. And we said, hey, we're going to be just 90 miles away from Cuba, where in 1962, we almost had a nuclear war over the so-called Cuban Missile Crisis. So we made a decision to sail to Cuba, and we were able to manage that with both governments relatively easily. We were surprised. We were able to sail to Cuba under a general license as opposed to applying for a license particular to our trip. And that general license allows people to travel to Cuba for educational and cultural exchanges. We had to be part of an organized educational program, and we did participate in a program that was organized by a group called Proximity Cuba, and it was a cultural, basically about Cuban arts and culture. It's a fantastic program. We were very well received in Cuba, as you can imagine. And we came back thinking, well, gosh, we almost had a nuclear war there over this hostile U.S. policy towards Cuba. You've repeated attempts to kill Fidel Castro, to assassinate the leader of Cuba, and to overthrow the Cuban Revolution is the reason why Cuba was willing to allow the Soviet Union to place intermediate nuclear weapons on Cuba, thus causing the Cuban Missile Crisis. Of course, from the Soviet Union's point of view, they were responding to the fact that the U.S. had placed nuclear missiles in Turkey near Russia's border. So the way that crisis was resolved was that Kennedy and Khrushchev both freaked out, thinking, oh my God, look how close we are to blowing up the world. And they seriously negotiated. They made a deal that where Khrushchev pulled the missiles out of Cuba, and the U.S. promised not to invade Cuba again. And but there was also a silent deal that was part of this thing, and that was that the U.S. would withdraw its nuclear missiles from Turkey, which they did quietly several months later. And the reason it was quiet because I guess they figured that Kennedy couldn't get away with it politically from the right-wing militarists in the U.S., and so they had to kind of do it on the QT, but they did it. That's what happened. Unfortunately, today, U.S. nuclear missiles are back in Turkey. It's one of the 5 European countries where U.S. missiles are based. And also, unfortunately, 61 years later, the U.S. still has an extremely hostile, unfriendly policy towards the Cuban Revolution and the Cuban people, and maintains a really vicious blockade. Under Obama, a few measures were taken to mitigate the blockade, to make it easier to travel to Cuba, to move towards removing some of those sanctions. But Trump restored them and then added even more, and added Cuba to the list of state sponsors of terrorism, which makes it even harder for them to engage in normal international trade. And Biden has done nothing to reverse those measures by Trump. And, we had a great reception in Cuba. We met a lot of wonderful Cuban people, and the spirit there is amazing. But there's little doubt that people are currently suffering a lot in Cuba. They're having serious economic troubles. And instead of reaching out a helping hand, the U.S. has only doubled down. And people are suffering quite a bit, to such an extent that there's actually a major migration right now of young people, leaving Cuba, because they don't feel they have a whole lot of future there. And that's a real tragic thing. So it's an economic problem, which is also creating political problems in Cuba, of course, which is exactly the intent of the blockade to begin with. So we're adding to the mission of the Golden Rule, the demand that the U.S. end this blockade once and for all. It's been a position of Veterans for Peace for many years, but we don't speak a lot about it. We're going to be speaking more about it now. And I should just add that what's going on in Ukraine right now, it's in some ways can be looked at as a reverse Cuba Missile Crisis, or a similar in some ways, because what's happened is that the U.S. and NATO have placed hostile military forces near Russia's borders, including nuclear weapons systems. And that's certainly one of the reasons for the war that's going on there. I think the nuclear posture and the nuclear standoff between Russia and the U.S. and NATO is really at the core, to a large extent, at the core of this war. Plus, we have a situation now where many experts believe that the risk of nuclear war is higher than even during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that if there's not, there's a lot of debate even in the peace movement about the nature of the war in Ukraine, who's most to blame, and how to resolve that war, because it's actually some people say 4 different wars in one, and it depends on which one you're looking at, the position you come out with. But whatever you believe about that war and its origins, I think it's not hard to see that if it's not reversed, and reversed soon, that it will continue to escalate towards World War III, which would be a nuclear war. So we should be scared right now, and we should be acting accordingly. So one thing, but it's also a wake-up call, because the Ukraine war is not going to go on forever, and hopefully it will be resolved without escalating to a nuclear war. But to be this close to nuclear war again should be a wake-up call for all of us, and we should redouble our efforts to rid the world of nuclear weapons once and for all. and I'll end it right there. And it's good to see Gerry Butterfield on the call here all the way from San Diego. And I would just want to give a shout out to Gerry and the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project of Veterans for Peace, which is also very, very active and has some wonderful PowerPoint presentations, and is making a real impact in raising awareness about the military's contribution to the climate crisis. And those are the two existential crises: nuclear possibility of nuclear war and the already unfolding climate catastrophe. And I think it's important for us to address those simultaneously. And if we do so, we'll have a stronger, more dynamic movement as well.
Thank you so
So
much.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gerry and Helen. And just for folks who were listening, if you want to know a little more about Cuba, you can go back on our YouTube series on our channel. And there's a presentation from Diane Stradling on US-Cuba relations, and Diane's on the call tonight. And we also have a presentation from the Veterans for Peace Climate and Militarism Working Group that you can check out on our channel. For Q&A time, feel free to put an asterisk in the chat or use the hand raise function in Zoom. Sometimes I'll miss the hand raise function, but I see Diane, so I'll get to you first, Diane. You can put an asterisk in the chat, and if you want to be unmuted, or you can type your questions in the chat and I'll read them aloud for everyone. So your choice how you want to engage here, but Diane has raised her hand, so Diane gets to go first. Go ahead, Diane.
Thank you so much for your information. Excuse me. I knew that the Golden Rule, had gone to Cuba, but I didn't understand the extent of your involvement with Cuba. And as you can see, my Cuban flag behind me, several of them. And I was in Cuba in February. I took a group of 15 people there. And I will have at the Golden Rule this postcard. Can you read it?
Yes, right on. Cuba is not a state sponsor of terrorism. Yay.
Yeah, this is going to President Biden. This is, I will have those postcards for people to sign, and I'll have more information to share about Cuba also and what's going on there. But thank you very much for your information. Very important.
That campaign to remove this designation of state sponsor of terrorism is the most important immediate thing that can be done, according to our friends in Cuba and our friends in the Cuba Solidarity. It's for one thing, it can be done by the president. He put it on, he can take it off. I guess it was actually by Trump that put it on. Biden can take it off. He doesn't have to go through a whole lot of process and negotiate with a whole lot of people. And so it's kind of the low-hanging fruit in a way, and it's a good target for us. And I should add that we were honored to have the Cuban ambassador to the United Nations and the first secretary come down to visit us on the Golden Rule about a week or so back when we were in New York City.
Yeah, that's great. Unfortunately, Biden just put them back on the, kept them on the SSOT list. He had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to take them off, and he continued to keep them on. So we really have to push back against his reluctance to do anything positive when it comes to Cuba. So there's a lot of work to be done there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. Jackie from Peace Action Maine.
Thanks. This question actually is to Diane. Diane, do you have enough of those that you might be able to send some of them up to Maine?
I don't. They actually come out of Canada, but I can order some more. So I will.
Or send a link that we can order them from. That would be
okay.
That would be good.
Okay.
I'll put a link in the chat, and we can pull them from there. Or
I will do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So how does most of the crew, I know that the crew of the Golden Rule it rotates, right? So how often do they rotate, and where do you draw crew from?
Well, we get crew from all over the place and we rotate a totally variable schedule. So we've had people on for a day, a couple of weeks. Sometimes a crew member will be on for months. And people can be crew, although it's a pretty full, our slots are mostly full. But on our website under help and support is a crew application form.
Right now, we have a Hawaiian captain, Captain Kiko Johnson Kitazawa, who's been with us quite a few times. He sailed with us around the Hawaiian Islands. He sailed the boat back from Hawaii to San Francisco. That's a month-long voyage across the Pacific. And he's sailing with us now. Next week, we're going to be joined by a woman captain who's also happens to be from Hawaii. We've had a really good luck with our captains and our crew, who've not only mostly been good sailors, and some of the crew, we have to have a very experienced captain and a good solid first mate. The third person on the crew, sometimes we only have a 3 crew, just needs to be a good solid deckhand to be able to follow orders, doesn't necessarily have to be a super experienced sailor. And the fourth person, if we have a fourth person, could even be less experienced. There's a place for people to play, but not only have we had good sailors, but they've all turned out to be great ambassadors. And they end up speaking and engaging and connecting with us with a lot of people. So we've been really blessed, and everybody becomes, it's such a great experience. Everybody becomes part of a very happy Golden Rule family.
So Arnie had a suggestion that we can put some of those postcards. So Diane's in Portsmouth and Jackie's up in Portland, Maine. So we could send some postcards up to Portland on the Rule.
You bet, sure.
Great.
Unfortunately, I
rule, you
only
call
have
it.
about 25, so we can order more. They come from Canada. They come from Vancouver, Canada, so they'll take a little while.
Yeah, and
But-
she just put the link
That's
in
it.
the chat, so
It's
I'll
in-
do that.
Yeah.
Great.
Fire
It's
next time.
interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
Aaron. Yeah, I just noticed that Will called her the rule, as some people do. Like a bunch of the men in the boatyard back in Eureka, Humboldt Bay, refer to it as the rule, but the women call it Goldie. So different perspectives. I see Will Thomas had a question.
Right.
Go ahead, Will.
Of all the stops you've made since beginning the interior voyage and now the coastal, what percentage of young people have visited the Golden Rule, and are they educated and informed about, what you, Gerry, have said basically about the threat? How engaged are they? How interested are they? I'm just curious, and I'm talking about primarily high school and college students as well.
I just gave a presentation at a high school today, but generally speaking, our visitors and the people that attend our presentations are part of the choir that is already engaged, but it's really important to inspire the choir because it's the choir that'll in turn help inspire the other people outside. I'd say maybe 10 or 20% of our visitors are younger people, and when they find out about the project, they're very excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
But when they come in at first, they don't know anything about nuclear weapons or the strong possibility right now of nuclear war, or that people are doing anything about it.
Can
We
you
do get some
have
young
you
people.
left information at the schools for teachers? And I was hoping that there would be more, while school is in session, to have more educators bring classes of students to learn more about the history, first of all, the Golden Rule, I mean, just perfect. When I learned from Arnie, I think who's here, about the government, case against the Golden Rule. So the Golden Rule versus the U.S. government. I mean, that's classic. How can you lose?
Well, it's difficult to get into the schools unless you know a teacher, and we are not from anywhere
Yeah.
that we visit. So
What the local organizers are often able to
local
arrange.
organizers can often do that. And then we can go in the
Yeah.
schools and have an impact. Yes.
Yeah, was it Florida or South Carolina where a whole class of African-American high school students came out to visit the boat and really had a great time with them. But yeah, they're learning about these things for the first time. Young people don't know about the nuclear threat. They know about the climate change because it's happening all around us now, and there's a lot of people talking about it. But the threat of nuclear weapons, they didn't grow up having to hide under their desks in school with anti-nuclear drills like we did. So we have a lot of important education to do, Will.
Of course, the exception to that is in Hawaii, where they are the target of nuclear weapons and had that very scary, this is not a drill, incoming nuclear weapons thing happen. So there they've always known about nuclear weapons because a lot of people in Hawaii came from Japan.
Right. Well,
And
you're
the
doing a
Marshall
great job. I mean, Beds for Peace and the crew, and it's just a wonderful project. So keep on keeping on.
Thank you.
I saw a question in the chat about an action in Groton, Connecticut, which is going to be a stop that we're doing very soon. I thought I'd just answer that Friday, June 9th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. we'll be doing hourly sales up past Electric Boat, which manufactures nuclear armed submarines. And so we're just going to do as many protest sales as we can up past there.
Of course, our tour here in New Hampshire is just a couple weeks away. I think it's you arrive Wednesday the 23rd, is it? And then we've got Thursday on that Thursday. Make sure I'm getting the dates right. No, I was wrong. So the 21st is when you're planning to arrive, but we're doing a welcome at 11 a.m. on Thursday, the 22nd. And then there will be chances to check out the rule and meet the crew between 11 and 3 on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And then, of course, we're going to have a big event on Saturday evening after Seacoast Pride at South Unitarian Church in Portsmouth. So I hope everybody who's here can make it to that event. We'll have music and speakers. Ira Hellfan's going to come. So can I ask about the wake? Your wake, and this is figurative, not literal. Have you? I know here in New Hampshire we've used a strategy around town meeting and city council resolutions, getting town meetings and city councils to accept the principles back from the brink and endorse those principles. Have you, as you've gone, seen that towns and cities, as you've passed by? Of course, Portsmouth passed one 2 or 3 years ago, but have you seen other cities and towns, as you've passed by, adopt back from the brink resolutions or similar resolutions?
Yes, a lot of them have, and a lot of them have as a result of the organizing that has gone on regarding receiving the Golden Rule. So one of the things we do is say, okay, here's some things you can do 3 or 4 months before the Golden Rule even arrives, is to get your proclamation of welcome going and get your resolution in favor of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and the other back from the brink measures going. And so very often those two things happen at the city level at the same time. So that's nice early engagement to get the politicians and their people educated.
We're also receiving welcome proclamations and Golden Rule Day and Week proclamations from many mayors. And the language of those proclamations that welcome the Golden Rule include support for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and the back from the brink measures. So yeah, that's been been very strong and consistent and relatively easy. I've been surprised about that. And a lot of these mayors are also part of the Mayors for Peace network, which focuses on nuclear disarmament as well.
We in Portsmouth has passed. It's part of a cluster. We have an organizing powerhouse. One of our board members, Sandra Yarney, who's down on the Seacoast, and she with her team at Seacoast Peace Response pushed a number of town meeting resolutions through. But I know Kittery, just across the bay, does not have a resolution in place, and I wouldn't want to step on Jackie's toes or move on her turf without checking with her and Martha first. But Kittery could be an area that we could definitely try to pass something like that. I've got a question from Amy Antonucci, and that is, it seems problematic and undemocratic, to put it lightly, that a president can unilaterally leave a treaty that's been ratified by the Senate. Is any group working on challenging that, to your knowledge?
Not that we know of. We were just talking about that today. That seems crazy that the Senate ratifies it and then somehow the president thinks he has the authority to just tear it up. That doesn't sound right to us.
No, it is very undemocratic for sure. So that's something to think about. I think we should talk to a few people about that and see if that's a campaign or something that could be added to the back from the brink measures, for example. Yeah, I think the people need to know about that.
And it's pretty wild. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I have a question. If they want to answer all your questions and comments, but if we have a few minutes left, I'd like to hear from you all about what's going on in New Hampshire and what we should be thinking about when we come to New Hampshire.
I think one of our, as I said, there's a cluster right around Portsmouth that includes Portsmouth of cities and towns that have passed back from the Brink resolutions. We also passed a no first use resolution through our House of Representatives. It was a non-binding resolution, but it was one of those that the president be informed that it's the opinion of the General Court of New Hampshire. And of course, it's just no first use, but it's still a really good first step. One of the things that we're working on here is House Resolution 77, which is the McGovern resolution covering support for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And that resolution does not yet have the names of any of our representatives or senators on it. And in particular, Senator Shaheen is seen as particularly powerful. She's a senior Democrat on Senate Foreign Relations and Appropriations. So we've been working on that, and that's been kind of our nuclear focus as far as legislative work over the last few months. Diane and Jackie, did you have your hands up from before, or did you have more questions?
We have questions.
More questions. All right. Well, seeing there's one chat, let me make sure that's not okay. Yeah. So let's go, Jackie. Go ahead.
So first of all, I don't know how I missed the resolution. So if somebody could send me that resolution, that would be cool. I will put it forth to we're going to have a proclamation from our city council here in Portland, but I'd like to have them also address the resolution if they might. As far as stepping on my toes, Kittery's closer to you than it is to me, and that would be a wonderful thing if you wanted to go forward with that in Kittery. Kind of a big state here I have to cover, so. But yeah, thank you.
We can send you a draft of our town and city resolutions. That's an easy thing to do. Did you want to go next, Diane? Want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, Will, if you have the schedule for when we're having different activities, if you can put it in the chat for the Golden Rule. And the other one is, I think it's important for us to put out that information when the Golden Rule is there about what resolutions have passed, because just because we've passed them doesn't mean that everybody knows that we have passed them. And I think it's important for people to see that the kind of support that there is and to join in with that. So I think that's something that we should plan on. But if we can indicate to people when they can come to visit the Golden Rule and what our activities are, I think that would be helpful to this group. Thanks.
I put it in the chat.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's the event listing. The full schedule is at the second link that I just put in.
Okay, good.
That one's updated today after our meeting, which fiddled with the schedule a little bit. So use the second link that's nhpeaceaction.org/golden rule. That'll give you a good schedule for the upcoming stop. All right, well, we're coming up on our last 5 minutes. So Helen and Gerry, if you have any final remarks before we give our upcoming program and say goodbye, go ahead and jump in.
Well, I'm really happy to see so many on the call today and looking very much forward to our visit to New Hampshire.
Likewise, yeah, we're finding a lot of like-minded folks wherever we go. We may be relatively small in numbers, but we're everywhere. And I think that we have maybe more power than we know, and we have to learn how to flex our muscles and really make an impact. So we look forward to meeting a bunch of you, I hope, when we arrive in New Hampshire, and figuring out how we can build a stronger national movement to really do a lot of important education and start building real pressure for abolishing nuclear weapons.
So I don't know much about your Massachusetts stops, or maybe it's just one stop, but there is a question from Deborah. Just where and when will you be stopping in Massachusetts?
Just Portsmouth.
No, that's
Oh, wait a minute.
Boston.
Boston. I'm sorry.
We have
Boston.
a bunch of planning going on in Boston.
Yeah.
Great.
Mass Peace Action
we're-
website has the
Yes.
information.
We're looking at the dates right now.
Great. All right.
You have that?
Yeah.
Okay. So check out the
Portsmouth is Portsmouth June 15 to 17, Boston June 17 to 21. And in Boston, we'll be there for Father's Day, and we are calling for a Father's Day for Peace, just like the Julia Ward Howe started Mother's Day and ended up being a Hallmark holiday. Well, we want to take the Father's Day Hallmark holiday and turn that into a Father's Day for Peace. And pretty soon I'll get both the Portsmouth and Boston schedules up on the website.
And that website is VFP for Veterans for Peace, VFPGoldenRule.org.
I think we've got that in the chat up above as well. And yeah, so check it out. VFP Golden Rule. I'm sorry. Check it out in the chat. For our upcoming program, do join us this Saturday. It's going to be my farewell barbecue, our membership meeting at Bear Brook State Park. So come. We're gonna have some stories about the last 14 years with me as director, and hopefully some hope for what it looks like moving forward. On Juneteenth, which is just before the Golden Rule arrives, we'll have George Friday, who's going to talk about the triplets of evil. That's King's triplets of racism, militarism, and extreme materialism. On July 3rd, Arnie Alpert, who's on the call today, is going to talk about New Hampshire people who have made history in radical change. July 17th, Tiffany Goodwin Van Camp is going to talk about the work of Combatants for Peace. She's with American Friends of Combatants for Peace. So join us every other Monday for the conversation series, and join us for our other programs too. And don't forget to come down to see the rule. Everybody go ahead, Jackie.
I just put Maine's flyer into the chat for
Wonderful.
what we're doing.
Oh,
I'm
thank you so
gonna
much,
miss
everyone.
you, Will.
I appreciate
I'll still be around. I just won't be director of New Hampshire Peace Action anymore. So I'm sure we'll see each other about. So good night, everyone. I'm going to turn off the live stream, and I think maybe a few of us will hang out for a few minutes to continue to chit